Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's VinPF, and on today's episode we're heading over to Denmark and we're checking out some new releases, to me at least anyway, from the Mosgaard distillery. Now, these guys were a brand new entity to me. I think I'd seen the name being thrown around a little, had never tried them before, and I actually managed to get myself onto a recent tasting. Actually just reached forward here. You can see I tried 4 of their expressions here. Now, these guys are a really small distillery. They've been going since 2015, set up by a husband and wife, and why not, indeed? They're doing things a little bit differently that we would expect, at least. Obviously, if you're well into your Scotch, you'll know distilling is kind of a double distillation or triple distillation in pot stills. So you're talking about shape, sort of like, squashed, and then the kind of swan neck vibe going along. These guys are using something called an alembic still, which is way more round on the bottom. I haven't got any pictures, unfortunately, because I can't steal pictures from Google to show you. But if you have a little Google of that and see what they're doing, then you'll be able to see what they've actually got on the go. So after the kind of bulbous bottom, it goes into the kind of the traditional neck that we see. But then there's another little bulb there as well. This is obviously to increase circulation of the evaporated spirit and allow it to kind of recirculate and get more copper contact, and obviously the lighter stuff heads on up. Less about that and more about Mosgaard themselves. As I said, they've been going for only a couple of years, but what they're doing is batch releasing interesting stuff. They're kind of almost rapid aging. They're still doing the traditional 3 years, but they're using smaller casks, sometimes as low as 50 litre casks, and they've all got different kinds of finishings and full-term maturations and whatnot. The one we've got here today is the PX, and the reason why I've got that one, and I should say as well here that they actually sent me this for review after the tasting that we went through to. I did like the peat the best, but the peat isn't available in the UK just yet. But this one here, the PX, came a very close second for me, which was interesting. There was a sherry cask and a port cask one as well, and both very interesting. But the PX was the one that really surprised me. I'm not traditionally a big fan of, kind of generally speaking, PX finishes, unless there's kind of a bit of peat intermingled with it as well. So yeah, this one came a very close second, and hopefully I'll cover the peated one when that comes out next year. But yeah, anyway, after the tasting, they kindly sent me this wee bottle to review and to let you guys know about it, because I'm finding them very, very interesting, and I think they need to be on more people's radars. Now, as well, it's important to talk about this specific bottle. What we have here is batch 8, so they've been going for a fair amount of time on this thing. I believe at time of recording on Master of Malt, batch 7 and 8 of this are available, which is, interesting in itself. So if you really want to, you could try and see if there's any batch variation. I'm not sure about how that works out, but I liked this one. This is batch 8. So to give you a bit more information about this one, it's 46.4%, which is a nice one. We like that. They are half-litre bottles, and in this case, it's about £65 in the UK. So we are talking about a relatively expensive whiskey, but when you think about what you're getting here, we have to kind of I say this a lot on the channel, when we're talking about artisan, small batch, small distillery products, they can't release the amount of whiskey that like the big boys make in their kind of refill casks. They've been going for decades and decades and decades, and they're able to produce, mass produce that kind of 40% chill filtered, blah, blah, blah stuff for the 20 odd quid. So really you have to decide there and then if this is the kind of thing for you. If you want to try interesting whiskey made in a slightly different way than you would expect, then yeah, sure, go for it. But I will say at the top of this thing before we get to the tasting that ideal way to try this Mosgaard stuff is to try a tasting, because I have to say, although fair enough they sent me this one, before I did the tasting I absolutely would not have spent that sort of money on a half litre. But once I tried the tasting, and actually this is really good. The tasting was excellent. Jez showed us around the distillery live from Denmark, and sitting in my little study here to drink whiskey and watch his tour, and it was a really excellent tasting. But it really switched me on to these guys, and something that I'm very interested in now. Definitely need to get hold of that peat next year. Okay, a lot of waffling. Let's get onto this actual whiskey and see what we've got. I believe there's no chill filtration here and no added colour. Why would they, after going through all of this kind of organic stuff? I'm not going to go too much into that sort of thing. This is, for other videos, let's say. But yeah, the colour is lovely, and you can see as well that although it's PX cast, doesn't have that kind of iconic red PXiness to it. So let's get onto the nose and see how that's made an effect. Now for me, the first waft of this is kind of immediately kind of coffee beans. There is some youthfulness to it. There's some hay-like characters that I would normally associate with the kind of more youthful whiskies. I believe that this was kind of first aged in French oak. Don't know about the size of the barrels there. So I think it's probably the 50 litres that we were talking about earlier. And then it was kind of finished in PX casks between 12 and 18 months. So it could have spent half of its life. You know, these things are only going to be 3 and a bit years, I imagine. Yeah, and then after those kind of initial hay notes, then we're getting some honeys and some caramels on the back end. Interestingly, not much PXiness about it. Now, if this was blind for me, I would be really struggling to even think about sherry, to be honest. But that's good for me, because you know me, I'm not overly bothered about the kind of sherry finishes in this world. There's a few that I like and a few that I don't, but when it's more understated, I'm a big fan of that. Let's try on the palate. Now, for 46.4%, for me, it tastes a lot higher than that. Getting on for kind of 50%. Now, some of their expressions are a bit closer to that. That's kind of 48%. But the cool thing about this is that although it is kind of like sherry led on the palate, it isn't PX led, which is cool. I like that because, again, as I said earlier, I'm not a huge fan of PX finishes or PX maturations, generally speaking, unless there's a little bit of peat in there as well. But this one, in this case, it isn't overly sweet. And I have to say, when we went through the tastings, I wasn't overly keen on the standard sherry release either. You know, it was nice enough, it was a good enough drink, but certainly something I wouldn't buy off my own back. But this one here, I was a bit worried it would be overly sweet, but when we got onto it on the tasting, I was very impressed by it. Have another swig. Yeah, so for me, it's dried fruits for sure, but it's more of the kind of like sultanery vibes rather than the iconic raisin vibes that I would get off of PX. Bags of peppery spice going on as well. It's really lovely. In terms of finish, it's kind of medium, maybe a bit medium long, very spicy, isn't very sweet, isn't particularly fruity, but that's nice, I like that. And on the back end, it's quite drying, but as I've always said, when I get a drying note on the back end, it just makes me want to pick the glass up again and have another sip. So yeah, for me, this was the best of the bunch that I tried on the day, apart from the peated, which again, I'll hopefully bring you next year. Hopefully, at the very least, this has put Mosgaard on your radars. I would implore you all to check them out. And again, as I said earlier, if you're not sold on the idea, make sure you go and check them out as a part of a tasting. These kits are available, around, let's say, so you can get hold of them. And I would definitely recommend you trying a sample from Master Malt if you can, or something like that, because yeah, if you're not sold on the idea of these kind of small bottles, and I know a lot of you aren't, then it's well worth trying a smaller sample before you manage to go and get a hold of a bigger bottle. But for me, love trying these kind of experimental things and things that are not traditional, let's say. I'm a big fan of traditional, of course, but I do like when people do something a little bit different and try to make something fairly unique. And this is that in spades.